My parents called me on a Thursday evening the night before the estate tax audit, and my father's voice when he said my name had the particular quality of a man who has rehearsed the opening of a conversation and is now delivering it. And the delivery was careful and low and deliberate in the way that my father's voice is always careful and low and deliberate when he has decided that what he is asking for requires a specific kind of asking. And I sat in the study of my flat with my book open on the desk, and I listened to the quality of the delivery, and I thought about the file I had flagged 8 days earlier, and I said nothing, and I let him continue. He said that he needed to talk to me about something sensitive. I said that I was listening. He said that he knew my department was conducting a review of the estate of our late Uncle Raymond, and that Marcus had already received his inheritance distribution, and that the distribution had been processed through the estate solicitors several months ago, and that Marcus had used the funds to establish a property portfolio that the family considered a significant achievement, and that a deeper audit of the distribution would create complications that would be very difficult for Marcus to manage, and that the family was asking me as a member of the family and as someone who understood how these processes work to ensure that the file did not go any further than it needed to go. I want to tell you about the texture of that request, because I think the texture matters. And the texture was this, which was that my father did not say the word fraud, and did not say the word falsification, and did not say anything that could be accurately described as an explicit instruction. And what he said was dressed in the language of family concern and legacy and complication. And the dressing was skillful in the way that my father's dressing of things has always been skillful, which is that it communicates the content without using the words that would make the content undeniable. And I had been listening to my father dress things in that language for 31 years. And I had become very good at reading what was underneath the dressing. I said that I would see what I could do. I set it in the level register I use when I want someone to hear the words and not the register. And my father said that he knew I would understand and that the family appreciated it. And my mother said something in the background that I could not fully hear, and my father said that they would speak soon, and he ended the call. I closed my book, I opened the secure work laptop that sits on the right side of my desk, and I authenticated through the two-factor system, and I navigated to the case management platform, and I entered the reference number of the file I had flagged 8 days earlier, and the file opened, and I looked at it. And I want to tell you about my professional role before I tell you what I saw in the file, because the role matters to the understanding of everything that follows. I am a senior asset verification analyst at His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, and I have been in this role for 6 years. And before this role, I spent 4 years as a junior analyst in the same division. And the division's function is the verification of declared asset values in estate distributions and inheritance tax submissions. And the work requires a specific quality of attention, which is the attention of a person who reads numbers, the way other people read language, which is for meaning and not just for content. And I had developed that quality of attention over 10 years, and it had not once produced a finding that did not hold under scrutiny, and it was not going to begin producing unreliable findings. Now, the file I had flagged 8 days earlier was the estate of Raymond Osei, who had been my father's elder brother, and who had died 4 months ago, and whose estate had been submitted for probate and inheritance tax assessment in the standard way. And the submission had come through the division's intake queue and had been assigned to my desk through the standard rotation process. And I had opened it the way I opened every file, which is from the beginning and without anticipation. and I had read the declared estate valuation, which was £412,000, and I had read the distribution schedule, which showed the amounts paid to each beneficiary, and I had read the amount paid to my brother Marcus, which was £298,000. And I had sat with the two numbers for a moment. £298,000 is 72.4% of £412,000. The distribution schedule showed 4 additional beneficiaries, each of whom had received amounts that, together with Marcus's distribution, totaled £601,000. £601,000 distributed from an estate, declared at £412,000. The difference was £189,000. I had written the difference in my notebook, and I had written 46% beside it, and I had circled both numbers, and I had flagged the file for asset verification review, and I had submitted the flag through the standard protocol, and I had gone back to my queue. That had been 8 days ago. I looked at the file on the screen on the Thursday evening after my father's call, and I thought about a property portfolio that Marcus had described to the family at Christmas as the foundation of his financial future. And I thought about £189,000 that the declared estate value could not account for. And I thought about my father's voice saying the word complication. And I thought about the word complication and what it was addressing for. I opened the professional log attached to the case file. I typed the entry in the precise language that the division's case integrity protocol requires for external contact disclosures. And the entry recorded the date and time of the call and the identity of the callers and the nature of the request, which I described as an external communication seeking to limit the scope of an active asset verification review. And I noted that the communication had come from individuals with a direct financial interest in the outcome of the review. And I saved the entry. The case integrity protocol is automated from the point of a confirmed external contact disclosure, and the automation does not require my further input and does not ask me what I would prefer, and takes the entry I have made and processes it according to the protocol's own rules, which are that a confirmed external contact disclosure on an active case triggers an immediate case lock, removing the file from the identifying analyst's access, and an automatic escalation to the senior investigation team, and a conflict of interest flag attached to my analyst profile. For the duration of the case, I watched the case lock confirm on the screen. The file disappeared from my access queue. I sat in the dark of my study with the laptop screen the only light in the room. And I thought about my father's rehearsed opening, and I thought about the word family and the word legacy and the word complication. And I thought about £189,000, dressed in language designed to make it sound like a reasonable request from a father to a daughter who understood how these things worked. I understood exactly how these things worked. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. The senior investigation team received the escalated file at 23:14 on a Thursday evening, and they were not going to wait until morning to begin reading it. And I knew this because I had worked in this division for 10 years, and I knew how the senior investigation team worked, and how they worked was the same way I worked, which is from the beginning and without anticipation. And with the full quality of attention that the numbers deserve, I slept well. I arrived at my workstation on Friday morning at 8:40, and the first thing I did after authentication was open the workflow dashboard and check the status of the case integrity protocol that had activated the previous evening. And the dashboard showed me what I had expected it to show me, which was that the case lock had been confirmed at 23:14 on Thursday, and that the conflict of interest flag had been attached to my analyst profile at 23:15. and that the automatic escalation package had been transmitted to the senior investigation team's intake queue at 23:17, and that the senior investigation team had acknowledged receipt at 23:52, which meant that someone on the senior team had been working late on a Thursday evening and had seen the escalation arrive and had opened it, and I noted the acknowledgement timestamp in my notebook, and I noted that the gap between transmission and acknowledgement was 35 minutes. And I thought about what a senior investigator reads in 35 minutes when they open an escalation package from the case integrity protocol. And the answer is everything I want to tell you about what the case integrity protocol actually does when it activates. Because I think the mechanics matter. And most people do not understand the mechanics, and the mechanics are this, which is that the protocol does not simply lock the file and move it. And the protocol makes a complete forensic duplicate of the entire case file at the exact moment of activation. And the duplicate captures every document and every data entry and every amendment and every flag and every note that exists in the file at the moment the lock is applied, and it transmits the duplicate to the senior investigation team's secure intake system with a permanent classification marker that cannot be removed or amended by any analyst, including the analysts on the senior team. And the classification marker is red. And the red marker means that the file has been identified as containing potential deliberate misrepresentation in a submitted estate valuation, and that an external contact attempt has been recorded, and that the case is to be treated as a priority integrity matter. From the point of receipt, the original file remains locked in the case management system. No one below senior investigation level can access it. I cannot access it. My name is attached to it only as the identifying analyst, and the conflict of interest flag means that my involvement in the case ended at 23:14 on Thursday evening. And everything that happens to the case from that point is the senior investigation team's work and not mine. And the senior investigation team does not consult the identifying analyst and does not update the identifying analyst and does not ask the identifying analyst what they would prefer, and simply does what the senior investigation team does, which is investigate. I processed my regular queue on Friday morning with the quality of attention I always bring to my regular queue. And at 12:30, I went to the cafe and I had lunch, and I came back at 1:15. And I processed the afternoon queue, and at 5:15, my mother called and said that the family was having dinner that evening and that Marcus had something he wanted to celebrate, and that she hoped I could come, and I said that I would be there at 7. I want to tell you about the dinner, because I think the dinner is important, and I want to describe it accurately. And the accurate description begins with the atmosphere, which was the atmosphere of a family that believes a threat has passed and is celebrating the passing with the specific relief that people perform when they have been frightened and have decided the fear is over. And my mother had cooked the food she cooked for occasions that required the performance of abundance. And Marcus was at the head of the table in the way Marcus positioned himself at tables, which is with the physical confidence of a man who believes the room has been arranged for him. And my father was sitting with the quality of settled satisfaction that I had seen on his face before, at moments when he believed he had managed a situation successfully. And I sat at my place at the table, and I ate the food. And I watched all three of them, and I said what the occasion required, which was not very much. Marcus talked about the property. It was a commercial unit, in a development that he described with the specific enthusiasm of a person who has recently acquired something and wants the room to understand its value. And he talked about the yield projections and the location and the structural survey. And my father listened with the attentiveness of a man hearing good news about something he has invested in. And my mother refilled glasses and smiled, and I looked at my plate and I ate my food. My father looked at me during the dessert. He said that he hoped things had been resolved at work and that the review he had mentioned had not caused me any difficulty, and he said it in the casual register of a man asking about something he believes is already settled. And I said that I had followed the correct protocol and that the matter was no longer in my queue and that I could not discuss active cases in any further detail. And my father looked at my mother, and my mother looked at Marcus. And Marcus looked at me, and I looked at my dessert, and I picked up my spoon, and I continued eating, and the table moved on to other subjects. I drove home at 10:15. I sat in my car outside the flat for a moment. I thought about a red classification marker that cannot be removed or amended. I went inside. Monday morning, the senior investigation team issued their first internal audit command at 9:02. And I know this, not because I have access to the case, and I do not have access to the case, and I know it because the workflow dashboard that all analysts can view shows the movement of active cases through the system as anonymized. Workflow entries, and the workflow entry that appeared in the dashboard at 9:02 showed a senior-level audit command issued on a priority integrity case, and the command category was multi-year financial history sweep. And the scope indicator showed commercial property portfolio and personal banking records and estate distribution source documentation. And I looked at the scope indicator and I thought about a table with abundance on it, and a man with yield projections, and a father with the face of settled satisfaction. The scope indicator does not have a name attached to it on the public dashboard. I know whose name is in the secure version. I opened my queue. There were 9 items waiting. I processed the first one and I noted my findings, and I moved to the second and I processed that one too. And the morning continued in the way that mornings continue when you are doing the work correctly, which is steadily and without drama, and the workflow dashboard updated twice more before lunch. And both updates showed the priority integrity case moving deeper into the investigation pipeline. And each movement was an automated process, executing itself according to its own rules and its own timeline, and its own complete indifference to what was being celebrated in a house across the city by people who had interpreted silence as agreement and had made the specific and irreversible error of believing that the absence of a confrontation meant the absence of a consequence. I went to the cafe at 12:30. I ordered the same thing I always ordered. I sat at the table by the window. I ate my lunch. I went back to my queue. The senior investigation team works at a pace that is determined by the complexity of what they have been given and the complexity of what they had been given. In this case, was a 46% discrepancy between a declared estate value and a total distribution amount and a commercial property portfolio funded by the undeclared portion and a multi-year banking history that needed to be read in full before the picture it contained could be described accurately. And the reading of a multi-year banking history in a case of this category is not a task that takes days, and is a task that takes the time it takes, and the senior investigation team does not rush and does not slow down, and simply moves at the pace of thoroughness, which is the only pace that produces findings that hold. I want to tell you about the interaction log, because I think it is important to understand what the interaction log is and what it shows. And the interaction log is a read-only feed available to all senior analysts in the division that shows the procedural movements of active cases through the investigation pipeline without identifying the specific case or the specific subjects, and the reason it is available to senior analysts is that it allows the division to monitor the pipeline's overall throughput and to identify bottlenecks in the processing system. And it is not a case management tool and is a workflow visibility tool, and I had read-only access to it in my capacity as a senior analyst. and I had been checking it each morning with the same regularity. I checked everything, which is once. And without lingering on the Wednesday morning, the interaction log showed 3 new entries on the priority integrity case that I had been watching as an anonymized workflow item. Since Monday, the first entry was a banking data request confirmation, which is the entry that appears when the senior investigation team has formally requested historical account data from the relevant financial institutions under the authority's statutory information gathering powers. And the institutions are required to respond within a defined window, and the response is not optional. And the window had opened on Monday, and the confirmation showed that the data had been received and had been ingested into the investigation's secure analytical environment. The second entry was a commercial asset registry cross-reference, which is the entry that appears when the investigation team has submitted the subject's declared asset holdings for comparison against the land registry and the commercial property register. And the comparison produces a picture of what is declared against what is registered. And the gap between those two pictures is what the investigation is interested in. The third entry was the one I looked at for a longer moment than the others, and the third entry was a protective measure. Confirmation and protective measure is the system's category. Description for a tax lien and an account restriction applied to assets under investigation to prevent disposal or transfer. While the investigation is active and the confirmation showed that the protective measures had been applied to a commercial property portfolio and to a set of financial instruments, and I noted the category description of the financial instruments, which was premium bonds, and I noted that the protection had been applied at 11:47 on Wednesday morning. I went back to my queue at 6:17. On Wednesday evening, my phone showed my mother's name. I let it ring twice, and then I answered and I said hello. And my mother said my name, and her voice had the quality that I had heard once before, which was the quality of a person who has been crying and has not stopped, and is now trying to produce coherent sentences inside the crying. And what came through was not coherent in the first 30 seconds, and then my father took the phone. My father's voice was not the rehearsed, deliberate voice of the Thursday evening call. My father's voice on Wednesday evening was the voice of a man whose management of a situation has produced an outcome he had not anticipated, and who is now in the acute phase of understanding what the unanticipated outcome means. And he said that he needed to know what I had done. And he said that Marcus had tried to access his commercial banking platform that morning and had been locked out, and that he had called the bank. And the bank had said that the accounts were subject to a statutory restriction, and that the bank could not provide further information, and that Marcus had then tried to access his investment portfolio and had found the same restriction, and that the family needed to know what was happening, and whether I had done what he had asked me to do on Thursday evening. I picked up the glass of water on my desk. I took a sip. I said that the tax authority's automated fraud detection protocols do not produce random banking restrictions, and that a statutory account restriction of the kind Marcus had encountered is applied by an automated system when a case has reached a specific stage in the investigation pipeline, and that I had no access to locked investigation files and had not had access since the conflict of interest flag was applied to my profile on Thursday evening, and that everything that had happened since Thursday evening had been executed by the senior investigation team and the automated systems operating under their direction, and that I had no information about the specific case he was describing and could not discuss active investigations in any circumstance. My father said that this was not what he had been told would happen. I said that I had told him I would follow the correct protocol. He said that following the correct protocol was not what he had meant. I said that I understood what he had meant and that I had followed the correct protocol. My mother said something in the background. My father said that they needed to speak to a lawyer. I said that that seemed reasonable and that I hoped they found one quickly. And I said, "Good night." And I ended the call. I turned the phone face down on the desk. I opened my laptop and I checked the workflow dashboard, and the priority integrity case showed a new entry that had appeared at 1841, which was 4 minutes after I had answered my mother's call, and the new entry category was secondary asset identification. And I noted the timestamp and I noted the category, and I closed the dashboard. I thought about Marcus at the head of the dinner table on Friday evening with his yield projections and his structural survey, and his family watching him with the faces of people who believed the foundation was solid. And I thought about what a statutory restriction looks like when it arrives without warning on a Wednesday morning when you are trying to access the account that the foundation is built on. And I thought about the specific quality of that moment, which is not the quality of a dramatic confrontation, and is the quality of a system executing a process, and the process having no opinion about who is on the receiving end of its execution. I thought about lawyers who cannot stop an automated federal tax audit. I picked up my pen. I opened my notebook to a fresh page. I wrote the date at the top. I went back to my queue. There were 4 items remaining from the afternoon. I processed all 4 before I closed the workstation. I want to tell you about the Tax Authority headquarters building because I think the architecture of the place matters to the understanding of what happened on Monday morning. And the architecture is this, which is that the building has a public reception suite on the ground floor that is separated from the operational floors by a security barrier that requires biometric authentication and a valid staff credential. And the public reception suite is not a welcoming space in the way that some institutional reception areas attempt to be welcoming, and is a functional space designed to communicate that the building behind the barrier operates according to rules that do not bend to the preferences of the people standing in front of it. And the furniture is gray and the lighting is consistent, and the security desk is staffed by officers who have been trained to maintain a specific quality of composure regardless of what the person on the other side of the desk is doing, and that quality of composure is something I had observed many times from the operational side of the barrier, and had always respected. I was at my workstation on the 8th floor at 8:40 on Monday morning. The workflow dashboard showed 4 new entries on the priority integrity case since Friday evening. And the first entry was an asset recovery demand generation, which is the automated process by which the investigation team's findings are converted into a formal legal instrument requiring the subject to account for the identified discrepancy. And the instrument had been generated at 7:51 on Monday morning and transmitted to the registered address of the estate's legal representative and to the address associated with the primary subject of the investigation at 7:52. And I noted the generation timestamp and the transmission timestamp and the gap between them, which was 60 seconds. And I thought about what 60 seconds means in the context of an automated system that has been building toward this document for 3 weeks. And the answer is that it means nothing to the system. And the system does not experience the weight of what it transmits, and simply transmits it because the protocol requires transmission at this stage. And the protocol has been followed correctly. The second entry was a banking clearance revocation. I want to explain what a banking clearance revocation means because the terminology is specific and the specificity matters. And a banking clearance revocation is the formal notification transmitted to all registered financial institutions holding accounts associated with the investigation subject that the subject's clearance status has been downgraded to level 4 restricted And that level 4 restricted status means that no transaction above a defined threshold can be processed on any account associated with the subject without senior investigation team authorization, and that any attempt to use legacy clearance credentials to bypass the restriction will be logged as an access violation and added to the investigation file. And I read the second entry and I noted the clearance level and I noted the violation logging provision. And I went back to my queue. I processed 3 items before the interaction log updated again. At 9:47, the third entry was an access violation log. And the access violation log showed that at 9:31, an attempt had been made to authenticate through the commercial banking platform using a clearance token associated with the investigation subject, and that the authentication had been rejected by the platform's security layer, and that the rejection had been logged as a Level 4 access violation and transmitted automatically to the senior investigation team's evidence management system. And I noted the timestamp of the attempt, which was 9:31, and I noted that the asset recovery demand had been transmitted at 7:52. And I thought about a man receiving a formal legal instrument at his registered address at 7:52 in the morning, and attempting to use his banking clearance token to access his accounts at 9:31, and what the 89-minute gap between those two events contained, which was a man reading something and not believing it and deciding to test whether it was real. It was real. She called Mom. Mom called the clinic, and I know this because the fourth entry in the interaction log appeared at 10:04. And the fourth entry was an external contact log, which is the entry generated when members of the public attempt to contact the authority regarding an active case through any channel, including the main reception switchboard, and the contact log showed 2 calls received between 9:45 and 10:02, both from numbers. I recognized from my personal phone history, and both calls had been handled by the reception team, according to the external contact protocol, which is to take a name and a reference number if the caller has one, and to inform the caller that active cases cannot be discussed through the reception channel and to direct the caller to the formal case communication process. At 10:17, the reception security cameras fed into the building management system, which I can see from my workstation as a facility monitoring function, showed 3 individuals entering the public reception suite, and I recognized 2 of the 3 individuals. And the third was carrying a document case of the kind that solicitors carry when they are attending an institutional meeting at which they intend to make formal representations. And my mother was speaking before she reached the security desk. And my brother Marcus was beside her, and his face had the quality I had described to myself earlier, which was the quality of a man who has tested whether something is real and has confirmed that it is real, and is now in the acute phase of determining what to do about the confirmation. The security officer at the desk maintained the quality of composure I had always respected in the security team. Marcus said something to the officer, and the officer responded, and Marcus said something further, and the solicitor placed a document on the desk, and my mother said something, and the officer picked up the internal telephone on the desk. The doctor's reveal came at 10:23. Dr. Evelyn Vance is the Chief Enforcement Officer of the Senior Investigation Division, and she has been in that role for 12 years, and she has the quality that all effective enforcement officers develop over 12 years, which is the quality of a person for whom the gap between what someone wants to be true and what the evidence shows to be true is not a source of discomfort and is simply the territory in which they work every day. And she came through the door beside the security barrier at 10:23. And she crossed the reception suite and she stopped at a distance of 2 meters from my mother and my brother and the solicitor. And she said that she was the senior officer responsible for the case that had brought them to the building, and that she wanted to provide them with some information before the mandatory data verification meeting that had been scheduled for 11. She said that the falsified estate valuation documents that had been submitted as part of the late Raymond Osei's probate filing had been formally logged with the Commercial Fraud Unit. At 8 this morning, she set it in the register she used for everything which was level and precise and without the performance of significance, because the significance was already in the content and did not require the register to carry additional weight. The solicitor said something. Dr. Evelyn Vance said that the formal case communication process was the appropriate channel for legal representations, and that the details were in the documentation that had been transmitted that morning, and that the mandatory data verification meeting would begin at 11 in room 4 on the lower ground floor, and that attendance was required under the authority's statutory powers, and that the meeting details had been confirmed through the case communication system. She turned and she walked back through the door beside the security barrier. I watched the reception camera feed on my monitoring screen. My mother sat down on one of the gray chairs. Marcus stood beside her with the document case solicitor, and the three of them had the quality of people who have arrived somewhere with a plan and have just been informed by the architecture of the place that the plan was not designed for the building. They are standing in. The workflow dashboard updated at 10:31. The entry read mandatory verification meeting confirmed lower ground floor, room for 1100 hours, 3 attendees logged. I looked at the entry. I noted the timestamp. I thought about a Thursday evening and a father's rehearsed voice and the word complication used as a dressing for a different word entirely. And I thought about a case lock that activated at 23:14 and had been running without interruption for 3 weeks. And I thought about a system that does not have feelings about what it transmits and simply transmits it because the protocol requires it. I closed the monitoring screen. I opened my queue. There were 7 items waiting. I processed the first one, and I noted my findings in the precise and sequential manner that the work requires, and I moved to the second, and the morning continued, and the lower ground floor room. 4 was 2 floors below me, and the meeting would begin in 29 minutes, and I would not be in the meeting and had no involvement in the meeting, and the meeting would proceed according to its own protocol and its own rules and its own complete indifference to the preferences of the people sitting inside it. I processed the second item. I moved to the third. I arrived at the 8th floor at 7:30 on Tuesday morning, which was 90 minutes before my assistant had scheduled the family meeting. And I want to tell you about the executive suite on the 8th floor, because I think the description matters. And the description is this, which is that the suite occupies the south-facing corner of the building and has glass on 2 sides. And the glass is the specific kind of glass that is used in institutional buildings, where the architecture is intended to communicate permanence, and the permanence is communicated through the weight of the glass and the precision of the framing, and the way the light moves through it in the morning, which is not warmly and is with the flat clarity of something that does not soften what it illuminates. And the desk is positioned so that the person behind it has the light behind them, and the person across from it has the light in front of them. And the chair behind the desk is high-backed and leather, and faces the door. And I had been sitting in it for 45 minutes when my assistant knocked. I had spent the 45 minutes reading the compliance folder. The compliance folder is a matte black document wallet, and it contains the senior investigation team's consolidated findings, and the findings had been transmitted to my directorate on Monday afternoon, following the mandatory data verification meeting in room 4 on the lower ground floor, And I had read the findings on Monday evening, and I had read them again on Tuesday morning, and I want to tell you what they contained. Because I think the content matters. And the content was this, which was a complete and documented account of a 46% discrepancy between a declared estate value of £412,000 and a total distribution amount of £601,000 and a detailed mapping of the £189,000 undeclared portion through a series of transactions that connected it directly to the commercial property portfolio and the premium bond holdings that were now subject to protective measures. And the findings also contained a section on the falsified estate valuation document, which the senior investigation team's forensic document unit had examined and had determined had been altered after the original professional valuation had been completed, and the alteration had reduced the declared value by £189,000. And the forensic determination was supported by digital metadata analysis and ink composition testing. And the confidence rating on the forensic determination was the highest rating the unit assigned, which meant that the finding was not subject to credible challenge. I closed the folder. I placed it in the center of the desk. I turned the chair to face the glass wall behind me, and I looked at the city, which was doing what it does on Tuesday mornings. And I waited. My assistant knocked at 9:14. She said that the party had arrived, and I said that she could bring them up in 3 minutes. And I heard her steps in the corridor, and then the lift. And then the particular sound of a corridor containing people who have been compelled to walk towards something and have brought a solicitor with them, which makes the walking sound different. Because there are more footsteps, and some of them are deliberate in the way that solicitor footsteps are deliberate. And at 9:18 the door opened. My father came in first. My father's physical quality on Tuesday morning was different from every physical quality I had observed in him before. And what it was reduced. And I mean that in the precise sense, which is that the particular volume my father had always occupied in rooms, which was the volume of a man who believed his presence was the most significant presence available, had been replaced by something smaller. And I watched him enter the room, and I watched him read the room the way people read rooms when they have been told they are attending a meeting and have not been told who the meeting is with. And I watched him look at the high-backed chair which was facing away from him, and I watched him look at the glass, and I watched him look at the desk and the matte black folder on it. My mother came in behind him. My mother's quality was different from my father's quality, and where my father was reduced. My mother was armored, which is to say, she had arrived with the specific energy of a person who has decided that the meeting is an injustice, and who intends to communicate that injustice loudly and immediately. And she looked at the chair, and she looked at the glass, and she looked at the folder, and I watched her prepare. Marcus came in last with the solicitor. Marcus looked at the chair and then looked at my father. And my father looked at the chair, and I turned it. I want to tell you about the silence that followed the turning of the chair, and I want to tell you about it with the precision it deserves, which is that it was not the silence of an empty room, and was the silence of 3 people receiving information simultaneously that reorganized everything they thought they were walking into. And the reorganization happened in stages that I could observe from behind the desk, and the first stage was recognition, which arrived at different speeds in the 3 of them, and my mother was slowest because my mother had been the most armored, and armor slows. The arrival of information that the armor was not designed to receive. And the last stage was the specific and total stillness that follows recognition, when the recognition is large enough to override the response that the person had prepared before they walked into the room. My mother's prepared response lasted 4 seconds after the stillness. She said that this was cruel. She said it twice. And then she said that I had arranged this deliberately, and that using my position to humiliate my family was not what my position was for, and that she was my mother, and that what I was doing was a betrayal of everything a family was supposed to be. And her voice was climbing in the way that voices climb when the management of a room has been lost and cannot be recovered. And the glass on two sides of the suite did what glass does, which is return the sound to the space that produced it with the specific clarity of a material that does not absorb, and my mother heard her own voice in the glass. And the hearing did not slow the voice, and the voice continued, and I sat in the chair, and I looked at her, and I did not change my expression, and I did not raise my hand, and I simply waited. When the voice had finished, I opened the matte black folder. I said that I wanted to read them, the consolidated findings summary. And I read it in the register I use for all professional presentations, which is level and without emphasis beyond what the content itself provides. And I read the declared estate value, and I read the total distribution amount, and I read the difference between them, and I read the forensic determination on the falsified valuation document and its confidence rating, and I read the section on the protective measures applied to the commercial property portfolio and the premium bond holdings. And I read all of it without looking up from the folder until I reached the final section. I looked up. I looked at Marcus. I said that the authorities' regulations required all cases where a falsified estate valuation document had been identified to be referred automatically to the Commercial Fraud Division, and that the referral had been made on Monday morning at 8, and that the Commercial Fraud Division's involvement meant that the asset recovery process would include a full liquidation assessment of all properties acquired, using funds traceable to the undeclared estate distribution, and that the liquidation assessment would be conducted by the Commercial Fraud Division's Asset Recovery Unit, and not by my directorate, and that my directorate's involvement in the case had concluded with the transmission of the consolidated findings to the relevant authorities, and that I had no discretion over the Commercial Fraud Division's process and no ability to influence its timeline or its outcome. The solicitor said something I said, that formal representations should be directed to the Commercial Fraud Division through the case communication process, and that the contact details were in the documentation transmitted on Monday morning. My father said my name. It was the first word my father had said since entering the room. I looked at him. I thought about a Thursday evening and a rehearsed voice and the word complication. And I thought about a conflict of interest flag applied at 23:15 and a case that had been running without my involvement for 3 weeks. And I thought about what it means to be told for 31 years that the management of things is happening correctly, and to discover on a Tuesday morning in a room with glass on two sides that the management had been the thing that needed managing. I said that the case communication process details were on the last page of the documentation. I said that my assistant would show them out. I looked at the matte black folder. I looked at the glass outside. The city was doing what it always does, which is continuing. And the continuing did not require my attention. And neither did the 3 people standing in front of my desk who had arrived with a solicitor and a prepared response and had discovered that the room they had walked into was not the room they had prepared for, and were now standing in the specific stillness of people who understand that the thing they had been managing has been managing them, and that the management ended on a Thursday evening when a daughter followed the correct protocol and the protocol had done everything else. The fraud transmission document was already open on my screen when my assistant showed them out, and I want to tell you about the document because I think the final administrative act of a case matters as much as everything that preceded it, and the document is a single-page form that requires the senior director's authorization signature to transmit the complete case file, including the consolidated findings and the forensic determination and the asset mapping and the banking history sweep results to the Commercial Fraud Division's intake system. And the transmission is irreversible from the point of authorization. And the irreversibility is not a warning and is simply a factual description of what the button does. And I had read the document on Monday evening and had read it again on Tuesday morning before my family arrived. And I had noted every field and every declaration, and I was satisfied that every field was accurate and every declaration was supported by the evidence in the consolidated findings. I clicked the authorization button at 9:51 on Tuesday morning. The transmission confirmed at 9:52. I noted the confirmation timestamp in my notebook, and I closed the document and I opened my queue. I heard the lift on the other side of the glass wall. I did not look up. I want to tell you what I know about the minutes that followed the transmission, because I know some of it from the building management system's reception camera feed, which I checked once that afternoon, and some of it from my assistant, who mentioned it briefly when she returned to the outer office. And what I know is this, which is that the security team accompanied my family and the solicitor from the lift to the reception suite, and that the solicitor was speaking quietly to my father during the walk, and that my mother was not speaking to anyone, and that Marcus was the one whose quality had changed most completely between the 8th floor and the ground floor. And the change was the change that happens to a person when the thing they have built their identity on has been formally classified as a recoverable asset. And what the change looked like from the reception camera feed was a man whose physical volume had reduced to approximately the same volume as my father's volume had been when he walked through the door of the executive suite, and I noted that. And I closed the camera feed and I went back to my queue. The Commercial Fraud Division's Asset Recovery Unit issued its first recovery instrument 6 working days after the transmission. The instrument covered the premium bond portfolio in its entirety, and the commercial property portfolio's 3 assets, and it established a recovery timeline of 90 days within which the assets were to be liquidated and the proceeds applied to the outstanding tax liability and the penalty assessment. And the penalty assessment had been calculated by the Senior Investigation Team's Financial Analysis Unit. And the calculation was based on the standard penalty framework for cases involving falsified estate documentation, which applies a multiplier to the undeclared amount. And the multiplied figure was significantly larger than the undeclared amount, and the difference between those two figures was the cost of the management. My father had spent 31 years believing was working correctly. The liquidation proceeded on the timeline. The instrument established, I know this from the public case record, which became accessible 90 days after the recovery instrument was issued, and I read the public case record once on the afternoon it became available, and I noted the final recovery figures, and I noted the residual liability, which was the portion of the penalty assessment not covered by the liquidated assets. And I noted that the residual liability was a personal debt registered against my brother. And I closed the public case record, and I did not read it again. The family's attempts to reach me through intermediaries began in the 5th week after the Tuesday meeting and continued for approximately 8 weeks. And the intermediaries included a distant cousin I had not spoken to in 4 years, and a family friend who had known us since I was a child, and a woman from my mother's church, whose name I recognized from childhood dinners. And each of them contacted my office through the main switchboard and each of them was handled by my assistant according to the instruction I had given her on the Wednesday after the Tuesday meeting, which was that all personal inquiries from individuals not on my professional contact list should be directed to the standard inquiry portal, and that response times through the portal were 30 working days, and that she should not indicate whether I was available or unavailable and should simply provide the portal details and end the call, and my assistant followed the instruction without exception, and the intermediaries stopped calling after the 8th week. I want to tell you about my father's care because I think it matters, and the accurate description is this, which is that my father's health had been declining for 2 years, and the care arrangement that had been in place had been managed by my mother, and the management had been adequate, and no more than adequate. And in the 4th month after the Tuesday meeting, I made a referral through the Public Health System's Senior Case Management Unit to have my father's care transferred to an independent public trust facility that I had researched and that I knew provided a standard of care that was significantly above the existing arrangement. And I made the referral in my capacity as next of kin, which I was because the next of kin record had never been amended on the public health system, and I was still listed as primary, and I did not contact my mother about the referral, and I did not contact Marcus, and I simply made the referral through the correct channel. And the referral was processed, and the transfer was arranged, and I set up a monthly status notification from the facility so that I would receive a brief automated update on his condition. And I read the updates when they arrived, and I noted them in my notebook, and I did not visit, and I did not call, and I did not write. It is a rainy evening in November. I am standing on the balcony of the executive suite on the 8th floor, and the city below is doing what cities do in November, rain, which is continuing, and the rain does not alter the continuing and simply falls through it. And I am holding my phone, and the screen is clean, and there are no missed calls, and there are no messages. And the standard inquiry portal has a 30 working day response window, and the window has not closed on any of the outstanding inquiries. And I am not going to open it tonight. I think about concrete. My father called me the concrete daughter when I was 9 years old, and he meant it as a description of durability without beauty and without the particular quality that he associated with things worth investing in. And I had heard it, and I had noted it in the place where I noted things without language, and I had filed it, and I had carried it for 22 years. And I want to tell you what I understand about concrete, now that I did not understand at 9, which is that concrete is not a description of a person who lacks beauty and is a description of a material that holds its form under pressure and does not crack when the load increases and does not require the approval of the people standing on it to continue doing what it does, which is hold the glass house. Took 31 years to build it. Took 23 minutes to transmit the document that ended it. The pipeline is clear. I go back inside, I close the balcony door behind me. I sit at my desk, I open my cube.